We do have a few more challenges here. Doctor of Love was up next, so let's go ahead and fight against Mr. Doctor. So we'll go e4. We've been mixing it up. We did d4 before, and now we're going e4. Keep them on their toes. And he goes for d6, the Pirts. And after d4, he's going for g6. So we could get into some kind of a modern here. Very reasonable, very combative opening, actually. Quite a popular opening, I feel, these days. And it's a nice weapon to use against so many different systems. The nice thing about the modern, first of all, is it's a really high percentage win or lose opening. I think it's like the highest percentage at the master level. So if you're a combative guy, you want to play provocative opening, this is a good choice. You let your opponent take the center, but on the other hand, you will create a lot of pressure against that center, sometimes with c5, sometimes with c6 d5, sometimes with a6 b5. And it's such a rich opening choice in that there are so many different transpositions and move orders and things like this. So I think it's a very good choice. Hactic says, wait, what? The move you recommended lost me 4 points. I apparently had an edge before then. You see, Hactic, that's what happens when you believe everything that you hear, and you take the opinion of another human being as the ultimate truth. That rarely works out in one's favor. You have to question everything. So I'm going h3 just because I want to take control of the g4 square and prevent bishop g4 ideas, although there is an argument for this immediate push here on e5. The thing is that what I don't like about e5 is that black, in some situations, maybe be able to put his knight on g4. So for example, takes, and then knight g4. I don't know, it's a very, very sharp position, but h3 is just a little bit calmer. After e5, he hits here, and now I will take this pawn. The reason I don't want to push the pawn is because he'll go knight d4 and then hit my knight and hit my queen. And that's going to force me to waste a bunch of time. So I prefer to just take on e5. The other reason why I'm happy to take on e5 is because if we get this structure here, like let's say even after his move here, this structure with the pawns closed like this, if you look at the bishops, for me both bishops are on good diagonals. But this bishop here, for now, is a very passive piece. So my hope is that I can get a little bit of an advantage just from this fact alone. David Sanders with a great suggestion. What about the move bishop d2 and queenside castle rather than bishop e3 and kingside castle? Yeah, really possibly would have been best. Hard to say, to be honest. I think it's kind of close. You know, I think it's they both have their pros and cons. That's a bit of a bailing out with an answer like that. But on the other hand, I really think it's the truth. You know, I think that there's pros and cons to both of them. Basically, the pro is that if you castle queenside, you can potentially attack, but the con is similar, that if you castle queenside, black can attack you much faster or much more effectively. So here, if he expands on the queenside, it's not such a big deal if my king is on g1. In general, for me, I think the reason why I went for this is that I'm trying to show that white is better because of this passive bishop versus this better bishop. That's sort of, for me, it's a positional battle. And so castling kingside makes sense in that context. On the other hand, though, there is one thing to say, which is that black may try to use this square on f4 at some point. And white would like to meet a move like knight h5 with the move g3. But if I play g3 with my king on g1, then there are problems like this pawn on h3 being weak and just my king in general becoming a bit weak. So it may be the case that you're right and that the better move was to queenside castle. Now actually with this move, black has given me that option. And although I have the option, I'm not so sure, because if I castle, he can go b5, I can move my bishop, and then he can start to attack. I'm not sure if I'm in the mood to be attacked, to be honest. But you know what? Let's do it. Let's, for the sake of instructive enjoyment. How about that? Don't even think that that makes sense, what I'm saying, but hopefully you guys understand. Today, I was working pretty hard before this stream for quite a few hours. So I think if my words don't make so much sense, then that's my excuse. Yes, David Sanders says you can blame me now as well. Absolutely, this is definitely something. It's definitely an advantage. So I'm going bishop b3 here. On the one hand, if he goes a5, a4, he gets a tempo over if I put the bishop on a2. But on the other hand, my bishop is better placed here. So if he goes for other plans like a5, b4, then I can maybe put my knight on a4 and my bishop on b3 supports and things like that. So I think it's really, again, touch and go, but I think the bishop on b3 is fine. This is definitely more risky, though, this whole strategy of castling queenside. And I think objectively, castling kingside is better. The more I look at it, the more I feel like kingside castle was the way to go. Because this, at least, if I'm black here, if I flip the board over and I see this position, suddenly it's like I have a ready-made attack. I have a plan. Whereas before, I was sort of struggling with this bishop on g7 being passive. So let's, the problem is I wanted to go a4, but after b4, if I move my knight, he can take this pawn. So that I'm not so happy about. So I need to do something about that. David Sanders, man. David Sanders. What are you doing to me, David? Okay, let's go queen to d3. And my idea with this move is to defend the pawn on e4, but also at a certain moment I might be able to drop the queen there into d6 and potentially get the queens off the board. That may or may not be good depending on what he does, but it's definitely nice to have that option. But one of the reasons, the main thing of course, is that I wanted to defend the pawn on e4, and if I go f3, then with this h3 move earlier, to then couple it with f3, I feel like the dark squares would be a bit too weak. So after f3, he might go knight h5 at some point and start hitting these squares f4 and g3. So I'm not a huge fan of that. Okay, b4 has been played. Definitely makes a lot of sense. And I'm just going to go ahead and take. And if he goes a takes b4, I'm going to go knight to a4. And this was sort of my idea behind putting the bishop on b3, that I'm able to support the knight on a good square. Now I have some threats, like for example this move. And for now, this is not a steel wall, let's say. You know, I mean, it's sooner or later I feel like the dam is going to burst, right? And black will be able to break through on the queen side. But on the other hand, you know, for now, black has to deal with certain threats that I have myself. So bishop c5 is one of them. Maybe queen d6 in certain situations. Maybe knight b6 in some situations. So there's definitely a few things. But he's gone there, which is very clever because the point, yeah, this is actually a huge problem. If I go, or is it a huge problem? I think it is. Okay, so I'm gonna go something creative, creative move here. Okay, let's go ahead and go here. And definitely the position, this is what David has done to me. The position is a mess, but what else could I do? I could go queen d6 here. I could have maybe gone queen d6, but after queen takes d6, rook takes d6, I wasn't so much worried about knight takes because of this exchange of pawns, but the problem is after I take on c6, he goes bishop b5, and he hits here and he hits my rook. So this would have cost me a lot of material, so I couldn't do that. And if I moved my queen anywhere else, then like d2, then knight takes e4 was an option. While if I go bishop c4, then he can take, and then in the end, this knight is hanging. So this would have sucked. Now he goes for queen takes c5, but I'm pretty happy about this exchange. I think, yeah, I think that black needed to find something a bit better than this. I'm not sure exactly what. Now, I definitely don't want to go rook takes d3 because rook a1 check would be a nasty skewer. I would lose the rook. I don't want to go knight takes because this pawn on e4 would fall, so that leaves me with only pawn takes d3. Definitely not the move I want to play in the sense that it creates this weak point here on d4 forever. But on the other hand, the worst is over for me, I feel. Maybe it's not over for me. Maybe it is not completely over. Yeah, okay, I think the worst is over for me. For a second, I was worried about this move rook a5, hitting this knight on c5. But I think if rook a5, I can go knight b7 and hit his rook. He must move his rook somewhere, and then I can go knight d6 and then knight c4, and I'm back. You know, my pieces are back and safe. I think objectively the position may be something close to equal. No longer is this bishop such a terrible piece. It can go here, or it can at some point go to f8. But I'm quite comfortable in this position because, you know, for a while there, I'm pretty sure I was a lot worse. I made a bad decision to castle queenside. And yeah, and I think that the second that the queens came off the board, I was very, very happy. Instead of this, maybe black needed to find some other move. I'm not sure exactly what. Something like queen c7 or something like this. The point is I cannot take his rook because my queen is hanging. So after queen c7, some move like queen e3 maybe would have been played. Maybe even something like check and then king here and then queen c7. I'm not sure. But on the other hand, I can understand his decision to take because maybe after a move like queen e3, suddenly the white pieces are very, very well placed. I don't know though. Queen c7, let's say queen e3. Black can start at some point playing bishop b5. He needs to maybe move his rook somewhere like here, and then bishop b5 is coming in. But I'm not sure actually, because I just set a line of the pieces going like this, but this would be a bad idea. I would have bishop d6 idea. So the more I look at it, the more I understand his decision to take. Maybe it was the best decision. After rook here, I can go knight b7, and I just wish my king was on c2 because then I would be winning an exchange. But here, as it stands, he has this check. I can then move my king and we can exchange one set of rooks. I actually think that that's a good deal for me because I think his rooks are more active than mine. So that's what I've gone ahead and I've encouraged, or I forced rather. And now my idea was to put the knight maybe on a5, hitting this weakness on c6. And for now, I should actually be a little bit better because I feel like my pieces, knight and bishop, I feel like basically where the action is taking place in the board is on the queen side here. And I feel with these weaknesses, whereas nothing much is going on the king side. Whereas, and then I feel like his pieces are focused on the king side. So I don't think it's a huge edge or anything, but I do think I'm a little bit better. So Chess Poems has arrived and says, "Hey Astaneh, hey, what is up, Mr. Chess Poems? I will not ask, do you have a poem for us today, because I suspect you get asked this on the regular. And okay, let's go check. I'm just activating my pieces, and knight d6. He cannot take this piece because of the pin. So he may end up playing a move like king g7 here to sidestep the pin, but if he were to do that, then there would have been the move knight e8 check with a nasty fork here. I think I can take this pawn. The point is, if he goes rook takes, I'll have the move rook a7, and there is no way to defend this rook that I can see anyway. He can, for example, block, but I can just take it since his rook continues to be pinned. Similar with these blocks. He goes b3, and now I just want to, maybe just without even thinking, in general it's a good idea to put your king somewhere. But the thing is, if I go here, he can take this pawn. So on this occasion, I do want to think, let's go king here, I guess. In general, I don't want to be on a dark square when his bishop can hit me on dark squares, and his knight can check me if I'm on a dark square, but he can't if I move to a light square. So in general, that's not what I want to do, but in this case, I think that it's good because I get to defend my pawns. Yeah, Doctor of Love says spike checks, smiley face. Yeah, there are, they were kind of spike checks there. So I feel like, well played, Doctor of Love. I feel like the position here was pretty decent. I mean, normal, but pretty decent here. No, actually, it seems like I misplayed it. So where exactly did I go wrong? Yeah, so it seems that what I was saying after knight c6, I had been saying the move e5. I had mentioned it in addition to what I played, h3. Seems like e5 may have been the way to go, although the computer also likes h3. So not quite sure exactly where white went wrong. Might have to check that in the lab. Maybe here white should just castle rather than this move bishop e3 turned out to not be a very useful move, or maybe just pin here with bishop to g5 and sort of annoy black a little bit more. But after bishop e3, my opponent was playing well, and then the queen went to e7, and turned out to be a smart move here because it invited queenside castle, and I think that was a little bit too much risk. Maybe kingside castle was better here. At least my king on g1 would feel safer, and suddenly this attack had wings, right? I went queen d3, seems to be one of the better options, but not completely convincing actually. b4, and then this opening up turns out to not have been so smart. Knight a4 was better, b takes a3, the point is bishop c5. This gives up a pawn here, but on the other hand wins in exchange. Still, the computer thinks black is better, which doesn't surprise me because let's say that you go queen b7 and you take here, and now you play bishop takes f8. Suddenly black has the bishop pair, a couple of pawns for now. You really don't want to take this pawn because that pawn is acting as white's king's shield. And black's play is just very simple. The rooks are not that effective because there aren't that many open files, and the only open file here, the d file, these points are being controlled. And if you put the queen on d8, well, that's going to be controlled very soon as well. So this would have been, I think, an interesting game, maybe objectively quite close to equal, but from a human perspective, I think you'd rather have the black side. But this turned out to be a big mistake, and here black played really well with bishop a6, and after bishop c5, it's what I was saying, play some move like queen b7, and you'll be okay. But I think I had mentioned queen c7, which is a lot more dangerous, and here you can see that if white goes something like queen e3, now bishop b5, crashing through here. I thought you had to move the rook, but it turns out you don't, because after bishop takes f8 here, black is threatening to win this piece, and if knight c5, we just take, check, king here, and knight takes e4. Again, very easy if you run on silicon rather than on blood, but in this case, black went queen takes c5. So great shot, a great chance for Doctor of Love there, and a great chance missed. If queen takes c5 here, after this you can see the engine now says it's roughly equal. And as a good rule of thumb, you seek to keep the queens on the board when your king is the safer one. And white's king is so dangerous here that it turned out that it was a smart idea to offer material, and with a move like queen to b7 here. So queen takes c5, it's approximately equal, but suddenly this move rook a5 is not so good. Instead, bishop f8 would have kept things coordinated, struck at the knight, and forced white to go back. The problem is that after the move rook a5, knight b7, we reached this position here, and suddenly black had to be very, very careful not to lose. And he played the move rook here, and suddenly he's already in trouble. I played knight a5, not the best move, but still good enough for an advantage. And after a few more moves here, there's a lot of pressure. Black needed to find the move knight b6, hitting the rook and the bishop, but the last blunder was knight c5, and now this allowed this tactical shot with knight takes f7. Okay, so this was a game.